My mother looked the judge straight in the eye and said I was mentally unstable. She said I'd been diagnosed with severe psychological disorders as a teenager. She said I'd been hospitalized multiple times. She said I was incapable of making rational decisions, especially about money. She said I should never be allowed to control my own finances, let alone inherit a single dollar from my late father's estate. I sat there in the Superior Court of San Diego County on April 8th, wearing my father's watch and my grandmother's ring, and I did not say a single word. The judge, a man in his early 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that had seen every kind of lie, listened to my mother's attorney finish his motion. Then he turned to Richard Keller, my mother's lawyer, the one with the slicked-back hair and the $3,000 suit, and asked a simple question. "Mr. Keller, have you bothered to look up what your client's daughter actually does for a living?" Richard blinked. He glanced at his notes. He looked at me. He looked back at the judge. My mother's confident expression faltered. She went from certain to confused to panicked in about 5 seconds. Let me tell you how I ended up in that courtroom. And let me tell you what my mother didn't know. My name is Dr. Rebecca Chin. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a forensic psychiatrist specializing in competency evaluations for the California court system. For the past 9 years, I've evaluated over 300 defendants, witnesses, and individuals in guardianship cases to determine their mental fitness to stand trial, manage their own affairs, or make informed decisions. I've testified as an expert witness in 47 criminal trials and 32 civil proceedings. 19 of those testimonies happened in Judge Theodore Morrison's courtroom. He once told an attorney on the record that my evaluations were among the most thorough and credible he'd seen in 23 years on the bench. My mother, Susan Chin, didn't know any of this. We hadn't spoken in 14 years. Here's what you need to understand about my mother. When I was 15 years old, my parents divorced. It wasn't amicable. My father, James Chin, was a structural engineer who worked long hours and didn't talk much about feelings. My mother was a real estate agent who talked constantly and felt everything loudly. They were fundamentally incompatible, and I was caught in the middle. After the divorce, my father got custody. Not because my mother didn't want me, but because during the custody hearing, she'd made a strategic error. She'd told the judge that I was difficult, emotionally unstable, and probably needed serious psychiatric help. She'd said this to make my father look like an inadequate parent for not getting me treatment. Instead, the judge asked if she'd be willing to cooperate with a custody evaluation. She refused, saying she couldn't afford one. My father agreed immediately. The evaluation found that I was a normal teenager dealing with normal divorce stress, and that my mother had a pattern of exaggerating my emotional responses to gain sympathy and control. My father got primary custody. My mother got every other weekend, which she exercised for about 6 months before the visits became sporadic, then stopped entirely. She remarried within a year to a man named Douglas Pritchard, a software sales executive with 2 teenage sons from his first marriage. Her new life apparently had no room for her difficult daughter. I was raised by my father in a small house in Claremont. He wasn't perfect. He worked too much and didn't know how to talk about emotions and burned dinner 3 nights a week. But he showed up. Every school event. Every doctor's appointment. Every time I needed him. He paid for my undergraduate degree at UCSD. He helped me with applications to medical school. He drove me to my MCAT prep course every Saturday morning for 4 months and waited in the parking lot reading engineering journals because he wanted to make sure I got there safely. When I got accepted to the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine, he cried. I'd never seen him cry before. He said his daughter was going to be a doctor, and that was the proudest moment of his life. My father died 8 months ago. Heart attack. Sudden. No warning. He was 63 years old and in seemingly good health. He went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. I was the one who found him. I'd driven down from Los Angeles that weekend to help him organize his garage, which had become a chaotic mess of tools and old project materials. He looked peaceful. That's what everyone says, but in his case it was true. He died in his sleep doing what he'd always done, solving problems quietly and efficiently. He left me everything. The house, worth about $420,000. His retirement accounts, totaling $296,000. His life insurance policy, another $200,000. His car, his tools, his engineering library, everything. He'd updated his will 2 years earlier. Very specific language. To my daughter, Rebecca Chen, I leave my entire estate. She is the only family I have who showed up. 3 weeks after the funeral, I received a certified letter from Richard Keller, attorney at law. My mother was contesting the will. According to the petition, Susan Chen claimed that James Chen had been suffering from dementia in his final years. She claimed that I had isolated him from his family, which was fascinating since she was the one who'd stopped visiting. She claimed that I had exercised undue influence over a vulnerable elderly man. The woman who'd abandoned her daughter 21 years ago, who'd remarried and started a new family and never looked back, was accusing me of elder abuse. I actually laughed when I read it. Then I stopped laughing when I saw the second document. My mother wasn't just contesting the will. She was petitioning the court to declare me mentally incompetent. She wanted a conservatorship. She wanted control of my father's estate until my mental health issues could be properly addressed. The proposed conservator was, naturally, Susan Chen herself. Her evidence was creative. I'll give her that. She'd obtained copies of my teenage therapy records. After my parents' divorce, I'd seen a therapist for about 8 months. Completely normal for a kid whose parents had just imploded their marriage in the messiest way possible. The therapist, Dr. Laura Simmons, had written clinical notes documenting my adjustment issues, feelings of abandonment, and mild depression. Standard stuff. Every word of it was accurate. But my mother's lawyer had cherry-picked phrases out of context. Patient exhibits signs of emotional dysregulation. Reports feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness. Demonstrates difficulty trusting parental figures. Presented without context, it looked damning. Presented by a mother who was trying to steal her daughter's inheritance, it was character assassination. Before we continue, please subscribe to Family Secret TV and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I see everything, and your support means the world to me. Thank you. The petition also included an affidavit from Douglas Pritchard, my mother's husband. He claimed that during the brief period when I'd visited their home as a teenager, I'd exhibited concerning behavioral patterns and seemed incapable of rational thought. Douglas had met me exactly 4 times. The longest conversation we'd ever had was about whether I wanted regular or diet soda with dinner. But here he was, providing sworn testimony about my mental state. My mother also submitted a statement from her stepson, Eric Pritchard, who was now 32. He claimed I'd always seemed unstable and volatile during family gatherings. Eric was 17 the last time I'd seen him. We'd exchanged maybe 20 words total. But apparently, that was enough for him to diagnose my psychological fitness. The worst part wasn't the accusations. The worst part was what happened next. The hospital where I conducted forensic evaluations put me on administrative leave. My supervisor, Dr. Helen Ortega, called me into her office and explained the situation with genuine regret in her voice. Rebecca, I know this is garbage. But we can't have a staff psychiatrist whose own mental competency is being questioned in court. It's a liability issue. I wasn't fired. But I was benched. No evaluations. No court testimony. No work that mattered. 9 years of building my career, and my mother had dismantled it with one phone call to a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my boyfriend, Marcus. Not my closest friend from medical school. I just went home to my apartment in West Los Angeles and sat on my couch, staring at the wall, trying to process how this was happening. My phone buzzed. Text from Marcus, dinner tonight? That Thai place you like? I didn't respond. He called an hour later. I let it go to voicemail. He showed up at my door at 8 p.m. with Thai food anyway, because that's who Marcus is. Marcus Riley is a civil rights attorney who takes cases no one else wants and somehow wins them anyway. He believes in justice with a sincerity that would be annoying if it wasn't so genuine. I told him what was happening. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your mother has no idea who she's dealing with, does she?" I knew what Susan and Douglas were doing. They were in financial trouble. I'd done some basic research after receiving the petition. Douglas's software sales career had ended badly 3 years ago when his company went bankrupt. He'd been unemployed for 18 months before finding a new job at half his previous salary. Susan's real estate business had never recovered from the 2008 crash. She was still licensed, but she'd only closed 3 deals in the past 2 years. They had a second mortgage on their house in Rancho Bernardo. Their credit cards were maxed. Douglas's older son had defaulted on a personal loan they'd co-signed. They owed approximately $280,000 to various creditors. My father's estate wasn't about reconnecting with her daughter. It was about survival. But I didn't know the full scope yet. I didn't know what they'd already done. Not until I started looking at the numbers. My father had named me as the executor of his estate, which meant I had access to all his financial records. I spent a weekend going through his bank statements for the past 2 years. That's when I found the first anomaly. 7 withdrawals over the past 18 months. Cash withdrawals ranging from $3,000 to $8,000 each. Total, $38,500. Each withdrawal happened within 48 hours of a documented phone call from Susan Chin. The phone records were easy to access because my father had kept meticulous records of everything, including a small notebook where he logged every call he received, including the date, time, and reason. Next to Susan's name, there were notes. Susan called. Needs money for Eric's medical bills. Susan called. Car repairs. Emergency. Susan called. Mortgage payment late. Says she'll pay me back. He never got paid back. Not once. My father had been supporting his ex-wife financially for a year and a half. The woman who'd called him an inadequate parent in court 21 years ago. The woman who'd stopped showing up for her daughter. That woman had been calling him for money, and he'd been giving it to her because that's who he was. He solved problems quietly. He helped people without making a big deal about it. And she'd been exploiting that kindness systematically. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and did what I do for a living. I analyzed. I evaluated. I documented. The cash withdrawals were just the beginning. I found emails. Susan had been emailing my father for 2 years, starting with apologies for how things had ended, expressions of regret about losing touch with me, nostalgic reminiscences about their marriage. Classic manipulation. She'd built trust slowly, then started asking for small favors. Could you help me understand this insurance document? You are always so good with paperwork. I'm having trouble with my car. Do you know a good mechanic? Small, innocent requests that established a pattern of him helping her. Then the requests got bigger. Money for Eric's supposed medical bills, which I later verified were fictitious. Money for car repairs that never happened. Money for mortgage payments that went to credit card companies instead. She'd stolen $38,500 from my father in 18 months. And she was now claiming he'd been mentally incompetent during that time. If she won the competency argument, she could claim he'd made those gifts under duress or confusion, and she wouldn't have to pay them back. She wasn't just trying to steal my inheritance. She was trying to erase her own theft. I called Marcus at 6 a.m. He answered on the first ring, already awake. What did you find? I told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We need to bring in someone who specializes in elder financial abuse. I specialize in forensic psychiatry. And you can't be your own expert witness. But I know someone who can help." He gave me a name, Patricia Vega, a forensic accountant who'd testified in over 100 elder abuse cases. She'd helped prosecutors convict family members who'd stolen from vulnerable seniors, and she was very, very good at what she did. I called her that morning. Patricia Vega was 52 years old with silver-streaked black hair and the kind of direct eye contact that made you want to tell the truth. She reviewed my documentation. She pulled my father's credit reports. She requested his phone records through legal channels. And she found more than I'd found. Susan had opened a credit card in my father's name 6 months before he died. She'd forged his signature on the application. The card had a $12,000 limit. She'd maxed it out immediately. My father had never known it existed because the statements went to a P.O. box Susan had opened in his name. That was federal mail fraud. That was identity theft. That was a felony. Patricia put together a report that was 43 pages long. Every transaction documented. Every forged signature highlighted. Every lie cross-referenced with phone records and emails. When she handed it to me, she said, "Your mother committed at least 6 different crimes. And she's about to commit perjury in a few weeks." I smiled for the first time since this started. Good. The court date was set for April 8th. That gave me 5 weeks to prepare. Marcus helped me find an attorney. Her name was Linda Wu, 61 years old, a former prosecutor who'd switched to civil litigation after 30 years putting white-collar criminals in prison. She looked at Patricia's report. She looked at my credentials. She looked at the petition my mother had filed. Then she smiled. This is going to be fun. Linda's strategy was simple. Give them nothing. Let them commit fully to their narrative. Let them put it all on the record. Then destroy them. We filed a response to the petition that was deliberately minimal. I denied all allegations. I stated I was mentally competent. I requested a hearing. That was it. No evidence attached. No counter-accusations. Nothing that would tip them off. Richard Keller called Linda 3 days after we filed. She said he sounded confused. Is that really her entire defense? Linda told him I was confident the court would see the truth. Richard probably thought I was bluffing. Or broken. Or both. 2 weeks before the hearing, Richard scheduled my deposition. This is standard procedure. The opposing attorney gets to ask questions under oath before trial. I gave him nothing. He asked about my education. I said I had a doctorate in psychiatry from UCLA. He asked about my job. I said I worked at a hospital. He asked about my teenage mental health treatment. I said I'd seen a therapist briefly after my parents' divorce for adjustment issues that resolved within 8 months. Every answer was short, factual, and completely unelaborated. My mother watched via video link. I could see her face in the corner of the screen. She thought I looked defeated, tired, broken. She had no idea I'd conducted over 300 forensic interviews. She had no idea I'd sat across from murderers, con artists, and sociopaths and gotten them to reveal themselves. She had no idea the flat effect I was showing her was a technique I'd perfected over 9 years of professional practice. The week before the hearing, something unexpected happened. I got a phone call from Eric Pritchard, my mother's stepson, the one who'd signed the affidavit saying I was unstable. He asked if we could meet. Marcus advised against it. Linda said it could be a trap. But I'm a psychiatrist. I assess risk for a living. And something in Eric's voice sounded genuine. We met at a coffee shop in Mission Valley. Neutral territory. Eric Pritchard was 32 now, thin and tired-looking with the kind of nervous energy that comes from chronic stress. He ordered coffee and didn't touch it. He told me he was sorry about the affidavit. He said his father had pressured him to sign it. He said he didn't have a choice. I asked him what he meant by that. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me about his grandmother, Douglas's mother. Margaret Pritchard had died 3 years ago at age 77. She'd had Alzheimer's in her final years. Real Alzheimer's, not the mild forgetfulness my father had never even experienced. Douglas had power of attorney. When she died, her estate was nearly empty. Her house had been sold. Her savings were gone. Douglas claimed the nursing home costs had consumed everything. Eric said he'd believed it at first. But later, he'd started asking questions. The numbers didn't add up. His grandmother had owned her home outright, had a pension, and had saved carefully her whole life. The nursing home wasn't that expensive. The money had gone somewhere else. I asked Eric why he was telling me this. He looked at his untouched coffee. Because I'm tired. And because I know what's going to happen in that courtroom. And I don't want to be part of it anymore. I told him I couldn't promise anything, but if he was willing to tell the truth under oath, I'd make sure it mattered. He agreed. I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not just hope that I'd win, but hope that there might be justice for my father. Marcus stayed over the night before the hearing. We didn't talk much. He knew I needed quiet. At midnight, I walked to my bookshelf and pulled down a small wooden box. Inside was my father's watch, the one he'd worn every day since I was born. A simple Seiko, nothing fancy, but he'd never taken it off except to shower. I'd worn it to the deposition. I'd wear it tomorrow. So he'd be with me when I finally spoke. April 8th. Superior Court of San Diego County. Department 23. I arrived at 8:30. Marcus sat in the gallery with Linda's paralegal and two of my colleagues from the hospital who'd heard what was happening and wanted to support me. Susan arrived at 8:50. She wore a navy suit and pearls that looked expensive but probably weren't. Douglas walked beside her, his face set in an expression of practiced concern. Richard Keller carried a briefcase that looked like it cost more than my first car. Eric came in last. He didn't look at anyone. He sat at the far end of the gallery and stared at his hands. All rise. The Honorable Theodore Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison entered and took his seat. He was 63, with steel gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at the case file. Then he looked at the petitioner's table. Then he looked at me. I saw the recognition. A slight narrowing of the eyes. A small tilt of the head. He knew who I was. But he didn't say anything yet. Richard Keller began his opening statement. He spoke for 14 minutes. He painted a picture of a concerned mother who'd been estranged from her daughter due to unfortunate family circumstances. He described my father as a lonely, isolated man who'd been vulnerable to manipulation. He presented my teenage therapy records as evidence of lifelong mental instability. He never once mentioned what I actually did for a living. He'd Googled me, found that I worked at a hospital, and assumed I was an administrator or a nurse. He never dug deeper. When he finished, Judge Morrison asked if the petitioner wished to make a statement. Susan stood. She straightened her jacket. She began calmly, talking about her concern for me, her worry that my father's wishes weren't being honored properly. Then her voice rose. She pointed at me. Your Honor, my daughter is mentally ill. She's been diagnosed with severe psychological disorders. She was hospitalized as a teenager. She's incapable of rational decision-making. She should never be allowed to control anyone's finances, especially not my late ex-husband's estate. I didn't move. I didn't react. I sat with my hands folded on the table and waited. Judge Morrison watched my mother's performance. His expression didn't change. Then he turned to Richard Keller. Mr. Keller, have you bothered to look up what your client's daughter actually does for a living? Richard looked confused. She's a hospital employee, Your Honor. What kind of hospital employee? Richard checked his notes. I believe she works in administration. Judge Morrison removed his glasses. She's a forensic psychiatrist, Mr. Keller. Dr. Rebecca Chin has a doctorate from UCLA. She's board-certified in psychiatry and forensic psychiatry. She conducts competency evaluations for this court system. He paused. In fact, Dr. Chin has testified as an expert witness in my courtroom 19 times. I've relied on her professional opinion to make determinations about defendants' mental fitness. Her evaluations are consistently thorough, well-documented, and credible. Richard's face went pale. I wasn't aware. Clearly. Judge Morrison looked at Susan. Her confident expression had crumbled completely. The judge turned to Linda. Ms. Wu, I assume you have a response to these allegations? Linda stood. We do, Your Honor. She opened her briefcase. She handed the evidence package to the clerk, who distributed copies to Richard and the judge. She started with the bank records. $38,500 in withdrawals over 18 months. Each one within 48 hours of a phone call from Susan Chin. Richard's hands were shaking as he flipped through the pages. Linda presented the emails. The pattern of manipulation. The escalating requests for money. She presented the forged credit card application. Patricia Vega's forensic analysis showing it was Susan's handwriting, not my father's. She presented the phone records. My father's notebook documenting every conversation. His notes showing he'd been lucid, organized, and methodical until the day he died. Then Linda presented Eric Pritchard's written statement. His account of his grandmother's estate. The pattern of financial exploitation going back years. When Linda finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison looked at Richard. "Does your client wish to respond to this evidence?" Richard asked for a recess. The judge granted 15 minutes. I watched Richard lean down and whisper to Susan. I saw her face cycle through confusion, shock, anger, and finally fear. He was telling her what I did. How many times I'd testified. How credible I was. How completely she'd miscalculated. When court resumed, Richard stood. "Your Honor, my client would like to withdraw her petition." Judge Morrison shook his head. "Given the evidence presented, I'm not inclined to simply dismiss this matter." He looked at the documents in front of him. "I'm referring this case to the San Diego County District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges. The evidence suggests identity theft, mail fraud, and financial elder abuse." He looked at Susan. "I'm also forwarding this information to the California Attorney General's Office for investigation into possible additional victims." He turned to me. "The petition is denied with prejudice. Dr. Chin is clearly competent to manage her own affairs and her father's estate." His gavel came down. "We're adjourned." It was over in 90 minutes. No dramatic confrontation. No screaming. Just evidence presented clearly and judgment delivered quietly. That's how justice actually works. Not with explosions, but with documentation. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you truly. If you enjoyed the story, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It means everything to me. Now, let me tell you what happened after that courtroom. The San Diego County District Attorney moved quickly. Deputy DA Carmen Flores called me 4 days after the hearing. She'd reviewed the evidence. She'd pulled Douglas's financial history. She'd found more. Douglas and Susan were arrested on April 23rd. Charges: identity theft, mail fraud, financial exploitation of an elder, conspiracy. The investigation into Douglas's mother's estate was reopened. Forensic accountants found over $160,000 in unexplained transfers in the 2 years before Margaret Pritchard's death. She'd owned her home, had a pension, had saved carefully. By the time she died, there was almost nothing left. Douglas had done it to his own mother. Then he'd taught Susan how to do it to my father. Eric testified for the prosecution. In exchange for his cooperation, he received immunity. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I didn't attend most of it. I'd already given my testimony, and I had patience to see. But I was there for the verdict. Susan Chin was found guilty on 5 counts. She was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. She'll serve at least 3 before parole eligibility. She was ordered to pay full restitution, $38,500 plus the $12,000 from the forged credit card, plus interest and penalties. Douglas Pritchard was found guilty on 8 counts. He received 6 years. Their house was seized and sold. The money went to restitution and creditors. Every piece of the life they'd built on stolen money was dismantled. I received a letter from Susan 2 months after sentencing. I gave it to Marcus unopened. He read it and told me it was 4 pages of self-justification without a single real apology. He asked if I wanted to respond. I said no. Some stories don't need an ending for me. My father's estate was settled in August. I kept the house in Claremont. Marcus and I go there on weekends. We sit on the back patio where my father used to read his engineering journals and drink coffee that was always slightly too strong. I kept his watch. I wear it every day now. I kept his notebook, too. Not as evidence. That part is over. I kept it because it's the last thing he wrote. His voice preserved on paper, showing me that even when someone was exploiting his kindness, he never stopped being who he was. The hospital reinstated me the week after the hearing. My supervisor apologized personally. My first case back was evaluating a 79-year-old woman whose nephew claimed she was incompetent so he could access her accounts. She was sharp as a tack. The nephew went to jail. Marcus and I got engaged in December. He proposed at the same Thai restaurant where we had our first date. The food isn't spectacular, but the memories are good. I said yes. My father would have liked him. Some people think revenge is about anger, about hurting the people who hurt you. But that's not what it is. Revenge is about balance. It's about proving that you can't take advantage of kindness forever. Eventually, the numbers catch up with you. My mother thought I was weak because I was quiet. She thought I was broken because I didn't fight back immediately. She forgot that I was raised by a man who taught me that the best response to chaos is documentation. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. If you want more stories like this one, there's another one waiting on your screen right now. Click it, and don't miss what happens next.